Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session of the New York State Food Summit's panel on hunger as a racial equity issue. My name is Jamel Robinson, and I'm your moderator for this important discussion. We are joined today by several distinct and dynamic panelists whose passion and life's works have been dedicated to ensuring racial equity in communities of color. This session will give a lot of information in a short window of time. And to ensure that we maximize our time this afternoon, if possible, we will take time at the end of this session for Q&A. Please write your questions in the chat, and if we cannot answer them today, they will be documented and answered at a later time. Let's get started. So our panelists for this afternoon, we have Julie Chin of Albany Medical College. Julie Chen grew up in New York City and attended Bryn Mawr College, then stayed in Philadelphia, where she worked in clinical research for 3 years before medical school. She is currently in her third year as a medical student at Albany Medical College, pursuing psychiatry. Her specific interests are medicine, including prison reform and women's health. So let's welcome Judy to the panel this afternoon. Also, we have Ms. Shannon Morris, who is a registered dietitian and author of the MC Vegetable Fresh Rocks, the MIC, who has been working with communities from children to senior citizens over the past decade with a goal of making nutritional, relatable, accessible, and enjoyable for all. Let's welcome Shannon. Also, we have the Reverend Michael Aaron Poindexter, who is a pastor-elect of the Macedonia Baptist Church and the Community Schools Director for the City School District of Albany. He has earned his Bachelor of Arts degree and is completing his Master's of Social Work degree at his alma mater, SUNY Albany. Let's welcome Reverend Michael Poindexter. Also, we have Ms. Starletta Smith, who was appointed the Executive Director of the YWCA of the Greater Capital Region. And on January 2nd, 2020, Ms. Smith has worked with the YWCA GCR for over a decade, and for the last 8 years, Director of Transitional Housing and Family Services. Smith has professionally and personally lived by YWCA GCR's mission to be dedicated to the elimination of racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, and freedom and dignity for all. Let's welcome Ms. Starletta Smith. So let's get started. Let's jump right into the questions. So the first question I have for the panelists, what are the outcomes we are seeing because of food inequities within our communities of color? Anyone can answer that.
So I'll jump right in. I think for sure, and thank you for the introduction and welcome everyone. I think for sure one of the major outcomes we're seeing relates to health and wellness. An academic article that I recently read, produced by the American Diabetes Association, entitled "The Disparate Impact of Diabetes on Racial Ethnic Minority Populations," found that the rate of diagnosed diabetes is 77% higher among African Americans, 66% higher among Hispanics, 18% higher among Asians than among whites. Studies have consistently also shown through research that heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and stroke are among the most common causes of illness, disability, and death in the US. And one of those factors that leads to those chronic conditions includes the lack of access to healthy food. So if you look at it from a health wellness standpoint, food inequities dramatically and negatively impact one's access to healthy food and ability to eat healthy. If you narrow the scope from an educational standpoint, food insecurities and inequities often are concentrated in communities of color. There's no secret about that. So sometimes students who live in these communities face uphill battles with academic performance in the classroom, not due to a lack of intellect or skill set, but body fatigue, the inability to focus at times, and a lack of nourishment. And so, and that's often attributed to a lack of a well-balanced diet. In Schuyler Achievement Academy, we're in zip code 12206, we have the highest childhood obesity rate in the entire city of Albany. Coincidentally, there's also a wide lack of wide-scale, consistent, and sustainable access to healthy food options in that zip code. So with childhood obesity lingering and borderline obesity at an early age, thus comes a possible trajectory for future health problems. So what outcomes? Health and wellness, for starters, is the major impact on communities and those who live within those systems of impact.
I can add to that. I mean, you hit it right on the head, right? So we know that comorbidities are impacting people of color. Brown and Black families are 2 times more likely to be food insecure than white families. We know that obesity, when it comes to children who are living closer to a grocery store, are less likely to be obese, as opposed to children who are shopping in corner stores are more likely to be obese and have behavioral issues, right? We've seen that time and time again. I think on top of those comorbidities and those conditions that can be prevented and maintained or managed better by poor diet, we also start to see just poor relationship with food, right? As a registered dietitian, I speak so much with people about their ability to understand where food comes from, how to make good choices. It's really hard to do that when you're surrounded by processed food, when no one's sharing any knowledge about it. It's not being shown in your community. The cycle continues to repeat itself, and that's what we see in our generations. And I think another outcome that you see from that is also in health equity when it comes to the health system, right? So you go to the doctor, with more brown and Black people going to the doctor, there's this bias that it must be because they're just eating the collard greens and fried chicken, right? And that's not what it is. There's so many other social determinants of health that impact our actual health outcomes when it comes to food insecurity. And so I do think that there is bias there when it comes to the health system. And we certainly need to do a better job of making sure that our health professionals are equipped to meet patients and clients where they're at, because there's so many different levels to food insecurity and the barriers that folks face that get them there in the first place.
Absolutely. And as Michael and Sharon had stated, we know that the food inequities are well documented. We just are not moving forward with it. But particular at YW, our BIPOC community makes up 51% of our residents. And of that, more than half have been diagnosed with diabetes and/or hypertension, have self-reported fair or poor health condition, fair or poor health compared to their white counterparts, which all stems from the wealth gap, which leads to them consuming foods that are high in sugar, salt, and carbohydrates, which are most easily accessible and affordable at the corner store versus shopping. Where we're located at 21 First Street, we are in the middle of a food desert. The closest grocery store is 3 miles away. So if we don't have money for medication, if we don't have money for good food, we don't have food to get to the grocery store. So it's these other things that are contributing to our Black communities not eating, our Black and brown communities not eating well. Like some of our children in the building are diagnosed with ADHD. Some of it is because they're hungry and they just can't sit still long enough to do the test or whatever the teacher is, asking them to do. But other ways that inequities in our community are hitting, like Sharon and Michael said, was the poor health, depression, behavioral problems, developmental delays in early life, and poor academic achievement. That's what we see at YW a lot.
Yeah, and just to sort of feed off of what everyone said, I also think that in a lot of low-income communities of color, it's, there is access to food, but it's not good food. So, there's a lot of fast food joints. And if you talk to a lot of people in these communities, they're saying some people are saying they're not necessarily going hungry as so much as they're just nutritionally not well fed. And you think about, all the bodegas and the corner stores and what they sell versus, grocery stores and how expensive it is to purchase certain fruits and vegetables and things of that things of that nature. So when we talk about a food desert, I think it's important that we see that it's not just about, your access to food and whether it's available. It's what kind of food are our communities getting.
Okay, thank you. And so another question, how can you encourage, because one of the things is you mentioned that, there's access to food, but it's not healthy food. And then when you live in communities of color, you have a plethora of, like you said, bodegas and stores with unhealthy food options. So how would you encourage those type of institutions to put fresh food on their shelves for the community? Anyone can answer that.
For me, I believe that to build an equitable food system, several other challenges have to be overcome, such as the lack of healthy foods. I believe in ways that which we can promote and enhance equitable access is supporting programs like community gardens and local food productions. Like, we try getting our women to go to the community garden, as well as starting to grow our own garden here at the YW. It's teaching them what foods are in season. It's teaching them how to work together. It's building upon your own community to sustain what we need. We can't depend on the bodegas to do it, because it's cost effective for them to keep feeding us what they're feeding us. But if we buy a 50-cent pack of seeds, it can get us through, the harvest season. It's just investing in ourselves and in other community access, like community gardens, that I feel that if we invest in community gardens, for instance, it's just teaching us other things that we are not necessarily prone to know how to do. I'm sorry, there is like residents knocking at my door and calling my name, so I'm just like, stop. So it's investing in ourselves, in our community, and not depending on these big food chains to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I would, I'm sorry, Shannon, you can jump in. I think it's twofold. One, I think, the bodegas and the small business owners do need to be supported in some way, subsidies, XYZ, to be able to procure, the fruits and vegetables. The other side of the coin is that it's a supply and demand thing, right? And so the front end of that is making sure that the demand is there so that the supply is taken. So, for instance, we partnered with Cornell Cooperative Extension, and every day they've come in and done 30 to 45 minutes of literally every day this year, every grade in our building, and they've done other schools in the district, to provide virtual instruction on what to eat, what not to eat, what's missing from this food group, so that we can start to train the young minds, impressionable minds of the students that we serve, so that when they go to the bodega, they don't pick up the bag of hot Takis that's, processed, not healthy for them, but instead they reach for the apple or they reach for the banana. And thus, if we can train, change those mindsets, and then change family mindsets, so that when families go to the bodega, which sometimes serves as that one-stop shop for eggs and milk and bread, as it was for, me growing up in the Bronx with my mom at times, you'll also see them reach for those apples and ask the store owner to supply fruits and vegetables so that they can procure. So I think it's twofold. I think it's one, making access points and making it available for the business owners and the bodega owners, but then two, changing the mindset as to why it's important to eat healthy, nutritional foods on a consistent basis.
So true, right? You want to make it a part of our daily lives. A lot of people, when they come talk to me, they say, I don't want to be on a diet. Well, my goal is not to teach you a diet. It's just a new way of eating, right? That hopefully you take with you for the lifetime. I think when it comes to a more equitable food system, I think about two things. One, I think about farms, similar to what folks were saying earlier. I think about how in 1920, there were over 1 million Black farmers, and now there are less than 1.3%, right? That's a huge difference. I would love to see more funding go back into farming and to have agriculture be attractive again, right? That's another avenue for employment for brown and black people. And there needs to be so much more support and funding to that profession. And there's been so much dismantling that's happened with farming in the last decade or last years, honestly. So I'd love to see more work there. And just to go back off of the youth development, children will teach what you teach them, right? And so we teach them how to grow food, they will continue to teach it. And who knows, maybe agriculture will become to thrive, and that may be an avenue for them. But when I think about housing developments and having gardens and having people growing food, that is a part of making that change. Having food co-ops in neighborhoods where the community is actually running the food system. That's what we don't have anymore. And so having that type of community-led initiatives are so important because they help lead with sustainability. And then my second point I'd love to leave with is just we need to have better access to resources, right? So in order to have an equitable food system, we need to make sure that folks can actually receive the resources that are available for them. So when I think about EBT resources, right? It's sellable, but is the system as easy and seamless as it should be for all people? There are a lot of hoops to go through. It takes time commitment. It takes a language commitment. It takes an understanding, a knowledge commitment, all these different things that you need to navigate the system doesn't make it super easy. And the amount of money that we're giving is really based on, how can we give food or give support for survival? But we need to be supporting people in how to thrive, right? Instead of giving you the fruits and vegetables that are just for the 2 days and then you have to go to the pantry, we should be receiving the economic tools that are going to help me thrive for the full week. And then eventually, hopefully I get on my feet and I'm able to make these choices and purchase this food on my own. But if we keep on giving the we'll call them pennies for now, the pennies in the beginning, it's really hurts us long term. And we call cheap food in the neighborhood, right? Cheap, but in the end, we're really paying for it in our health, and it's more expensive that way. So it's almost like you're putting a loan on it, right? I'll keep paying for it. But if we actually pay for it up front and give people the things they need to thrive, I think we'll be in a much better place when it comes to equitable system.
I think in terms of food farms, it's a great idea, and there's some things we also want to keep in mind in terms of what is being grown on the farm. Like lettuce tends to be very common. It's easy to grow, but it has very little nutritional value. We need to be able to maintain the farms. What's the time commitment, and making sure that these gardens just are thriving, and we're able to use what's grown there to teach our children, okay, what do I do with this tomato? What do I do with it besides, put it on a sandwich of some sort? So I think in that respect, just sort of being more intentional in how we make the most of a food food farm. And in terms of just equitable access from a more broader scale, I think in a lot of low-income communities with immigrants and people of color is we want to focus on the community's assets and not their deficiencies. We want to focus at what their strengths are. So, for example, I've done a lot of work at the South End in Albany, huge African-American population. And, and I think one of their strengths is small businesses do thrive there. But for some reason, a lot of these big corporations, they come and they're not as successful. And why is that? I think people in a lot of communities are willing to trust people who grew up also where they're from, and maybe promoting people into powers of leadership, because you can't have, one politician, one, president of a club sort of solving everyone's problems. And, I think it just, instead of doing like a top-down approach, just, sort of go from the bottom up. It's a very cliche thing, but it's really true in a lot of our communities. If you think about how a lot of developers, they like to come into low-income communities because it gives them a lot of tax credits. And, that's, so from a financial perspective, it's great for them, but why are they not successful? Is it some sort of lack of trust in the community? Is it, misdirected resources? Why is it that these big companies, whether the communities want them or not. That's also a question. Why are they not thriving?
Robinson, can I just follow up two things? I think Shannon really hit on, and as well as Judy, is representation matters, right? So when you look at, organizations like Soul Fire Farm, who will come in, who are run by Black women and people of color, who come in to communities like the 12206s and the 12210s and say, hey, regardless of where you are, regardless of whether you're on Clinton Ave or First Street or Second Ave, you can start a garden, you can start a farm, you can grow tomatoes, XYZ. But the important piece is that, especially for kids in the community and members of the community, representation matters. If they look like them, right? So I may believe you a little bit more by you coming in and telling me, hey, I can do this because you look like me and you've done it. The second piece I want to make point of, and Judy spoke on, corporations coming into communities and for tax credits. I think there's a common pattern of not just corporations who come in and receive tax credits, to the plight of the people who live in those communities. But there's also a lot of researchers who come in and ask questions and prod and get information. And then they get all this information. They spend weeks and months and years getting information, talking to residents, going to organizational meetings, and then nothing comes out of it. And so you have all this research and people become vulnerable and let their guards down and give you this sensitive information. And then nothing typically has come out of the research that you gained from them. And so, I do believe that representation matters and credibility matters. And if we're going to turn the corners, it's important that you put the folks who live in our communities in the driver's seat as it relates to food inequities.
Yeah, I just wanted, and I know you're going to skip to the next question. I just wanted to say the word trust. I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about building trust in communities so that not only it's inclusive, right? They should have a seat at the table so they're a part of the process and a part of the long-term sustainable change, as opposed to coming in, dropping some money and disappearing. It doesn't work. If we're not a part of the actual change, the people we're fighting for have to be at the table. They have to be at the table, and the trust has to be strong. Great point.
Great. This is getting really good. So the next question, how does food justice fit in within wider divide drives toward social, economic, and environmental justice?
I'm happy to start here. I feel like the intersection is, it's like they're interwebbed together. You can't have one without the other. It makes me think about the social determinants of health, right? The factors and the barriers that inhibit folks from having healthy food access. A few years ago at the American Heart Association, we actually started, we did an initiative. We had some funding to help educate folks to understand just this, the intersection of all these different areas. And we went down to Lower Manhattan and we played a game. And essentially the game was kind of like a board game. We did a chalkboard game on the floor, and we helped people understand the push and the pull of the system. And so, for example, if you are getting SNAP resources, take 2 steps forward, but you also live in a housing development where your cooking facilities aren't secure and you're surrounded by processed food, take 3 steps back, or you are a college graduate, take 3 steps forward, but you have hypertension, but you don't trust your doctor, right? People didn't understand all these different variables that have to do with healthy food access. And it's like, oh, I was so close to the end, but you have immigrant parents or whatever it may be. You don't speak the language. All these things are intertwined into really having folks take a step ahead, and you can still have so much going for you and be so far away from healthy food access depending on it. We talked about it earlier, right? Your zip code really does impact what you eat. I think a study even said that a zip code impacts you more than going to the doctor, right? So all these things, they intersect and they tell the full story of the barriers and hoops you have to jump through, unfortunately, to get closer to a healthier lifestyle.
I'll jump in. I think true food justice works not only it's not only for access to healthy food for everyone, but it deeply looks at how we arrive at this point. What are, kind of like what Shannon said, what are the structural roots of these disparities? Typically, when you dig when you dig deep enough and get to the structural root of food injustice, you find a similar thread, right? If you look at economic injustices, are there equitable wages and benefits for those who need it? Workforce development opportunities for those who would like to move forward but need guidance on how to do that. Access to adequate housing and education, safe communities. Then there's social injustices. You shoot for a more equitable criminal justice system, or access to voting opportunities, the eradication of voter suppression that target communities of color, environmental injustices, the removal of environmental and occupational hazards that disproportionately affect low-income people. And I think if you look at history says that communities of color have been bringing historical injustices in the food system and these other systems to light on a frequent basis. And hopefully in this time period, many more individuals, as they take a deeper look of the world that we live in, will focus not just on those injustices, but also food injustice. So, I think there's always a common thread. There's always a deeper way to look into it. Look at the impact of generational neglect and systemically oppressive policies. It's not a surprise that many communities of color continue to, in 2021, continue to face these injustices on multiple fronts. So, I think there's many different ways to look at it, but there's always a common thread to injustices, especially as it relates to communities of color.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add to that?
It's systemic racism at its best. For me, an equitable food system is food justice, and one that creates a paradigm in which including those most vulnerable and those living in low-income neighborhoods and communities of color can fully participate, prosper, and benefit from that. It's a system that, from the farm to the table, from processing to disposal, it ensures economic opportunity, high quality jobs, and a livable wage, safe working conditions. Like Michael said, it's access to healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food, all while being environmentally sustainable. But like I said, it's systemic racism at its best, and having to change so many different policies and being present to change these policies. Like, we have to do all these things at the same time. Like, we can't just focus on environmental justice, racial issues. We have to focus on policies, because these are the policies that have put us in these situations to begin with. So changing policies and laws, and I believe that is where we have to start, but also while we're doing other things in the grassroots sector. So
I think in terms of, systemic racism and trying to fight it, it's important to change our language and how we approach solving these problems. When people say, we need more education, we need to be more inclusive, what does that mean anymore? Like, that's not, a targeted way to address these problems. The community needs more money. Well, pouring money isn't going to necessarily, do much. And I think about some food initiatives that have been successful, but haven't been very, very friendly, or very they have been more intimidating to communities of color. So food co-ops, which is a great economic model, and in terms of bringing the consumers into the business process. But a lot of them, they look like Whole Foods. They have every single grain you can imagine, but a person of color, a Black person, an Asian person walking in, they don't know what this is. It's not something they've ever seen before, and it could be healthy, but if it doesn't look like what they've had at home, at their grandma's house, it just doesn't mean anything. It's not going to reach the most vulnerable populations.
Thank you. And I just want to remind everyone that if you do have questions for our panelists, you can definitely write them in the chat, and we can get to those questions. Okay, another question is, all of this can seem overwhelming to some people, the conversation. So what are some actionable steps? Where do we start in this process?
What a question. So I think there's a lot of things that can be done. And I think we were just talking about a little bit about that, Judy, talking about culturally appropriate foods and making sure that, there's diversity and perhaps people who are running food co-ops, so that when the Asian person or the Black person, whoever, West Indian person sees actual food that they know and love and enjoy, right? But that goes beyond the co-op, that goes to the food pantry, that goes to the FQHC, that goes to wherever you go, the community center needs to be culturally appropriate. I remember when I first started as an RD and I was working in Harlem and we were giving out pantry bags. And at the end of the pantry bag day distribution, we would see folks bartering food outside or throwing it away because they were like, well, I don't want this. I don't eat this. So there's one thing, there's education. There's a space for education, but there's also a space for valuing what people want. And I think it's really important that we do that. I think something during COVID that we did well, or we started to do better, was meeting people where they're at, realizing that such a great amount of people needed food access. So we started home delivery. We started, more people started doing client choice, allowing folks to choose the food they want, because you end up saving money that way. I think that I'd love to see some of those great things that has happened during COVID stay, including, like, for example, where we were giving folks the EBT cards for families to purchase foods instead of picking up school food, right? That was huge, a huge change that I think could be transformational if we continue it. I'd love to also see a system that is more transparent. We did a needs assessment at the American Heart last year, or earlier this year rather, and we talked to our stakeholders and they said, we want to talk to each other. We want to share data with each other so that we don't have to do the same thing that you're doing, and that we can actually follow someone through a journey of getting healthier and making a change. But we know how it goes in nonprofits, right? Sharing data and getting a system that all speaks to each other, that's a huge barrier. But I do think that the more that our resources actually start working together, the longer they're going to go. And then I'll also just add, clearly there needs to be policy work, right? More money needs to go into changing policies. More money needs to go into SNAP, needs to go into things like double up bucks or health bucks to ensure that people have the economic tools to make these choices on themselves. And I would love to see more health insurance companies actually covering medical meals. Food is medicine. That's what we're talking about here, right? We know that it's impacting the comorbidities and the health conditions. How can we, instead of always giving someone a prescription to a pill, how can I prescribe you something that I know you already have a gap for, which is food, and actually have it be something that's helpful for you and hopefully help teach you how to pick food in the future as well?
Absolutely.
From the policy level, it all seems very intimidating. How do you change a law? How do you write a law? And I think in terms of actionable steps that we can do is, what when talking to local politicians, one thing that's been very effective is going door to door and talking to people in that community individually, because that's something you can measure. That's a measurable. How many people did I talk to? How many people stated they wanted this versus that? Versus if you put something on social media, you post some educational content, or you can't really measure that very well. You don't know how many people sort of read through it, or it's so something that can we can measure. I think is important. Is an important first step, and doing like coffee meetups with your local politicians or your local leaders, and talking to people in a more informal setting. I think is somewhere we can start. So I think it's beneficial to see where, like, what's before we get to changing a law or changing bringing an entire new economic system in with some sort of urban farm or a co-op or a grocery store. Like what are small things we can do that it doesn't really matter what your educational level is or what your expertise is. Something that something small we can do but is measurable to some extent.
And I'll jump in and say, I think it's actionable steps and awareness. You be the change of impact. Don't wait for others to make the first move. You be the one who makes the first move, makes the first call, sends the email. Shannon spoke to this nonprofit barrier of sharing data. I love sharing data. And I think it's important because why reinvent the wheel when the wheel's already there and you can all benefit from it. You know, at Skylar, you know, we partnered with the Food Pantries for the Capital District. That's a wonderful organization. And since July 2020 in the pandemic, they've been delivering 300 pounds of fresh fruits and vegetables every week. To date, we've gotten over 12,000 pounds of fresh fruits and vegetables. Why? Because we saw there was a need in our community and we picked up the phone and called them and then they answered the call, right? So now we got two like-minded organizations who are working together for the benefit of those in the community. Same thing with Macedonia Church, every month during this pandemic, for the most part, we've hosted in partnership with Catholic Charities, a drive-through food distribution. And so, last month there were over 600 households that were impacted. And so now that same $200 that grandpa, grandma, whomever would have spent in the grocery store just making ends meet has now gotten a meal to at least get them through this week or next week and can take that dollar, that money and buy medicine, buy household items, do something that's therapeutic that actually addresses their mental health. And then awareness, you have to have partnerships and like-minded organizations, but you got to look at it from a macro, meso, and a micro level, right? You're looking at it macroly. You're saying organizationally, what do we need to do? Is this policy rewriting? You're looking at it from the top-down approach. The micro piece is what I spoke to earlier about, touching that person individually, making sure that kid, that mom, that dad understands individually the importance of healthy eating. And then your mesos in between. But I think we get into a place where we always want to talk and look at the data. I think we've got enough data and done enough talking to last us a decade. I think now is the time where you take that data, take those thought tanks, and actually implement change through partnership, through awareness. Why do it in silos when we can work together to impact the same community?
Or what about not letting data speak louder than the people, right? Like sometimes I think when you're coming from the top down, you're so busy looking at the spreadsheet and saying, well, this is what the data says. But when's the last time you actually went to the community and listened to the need? Needs do change. You saw that during COVID. Needs changed a great deal and very quickly. I think also just to your point, Judy, about advocates and, I think there's such a great opportunity right now. Hunger has touched more people than it's ever touched because of COVID, and people who had never stood on pantry lines are now understanding the process. And I do think there is an opportunity to help amplify those voices as well. Folks who maybe didn't understand, but now they do now. How can they now go share the message of here's the change that we need to see, and this is what the system is like to navigate. And then I will always advocate for young folks, right? We start young. We need to start gardening, teaching how to cook, as I like to call them, slow, whoa, and go foods. What should be eating more often and not often. These are very simple things that go a long way, and they will follow you for a lifetime. Whether you use them right now or not, it will come back to you when you start buying groceries for yourself and you're out of your household. They really do go a long way. But I do think that COVID has amplified this crisis, really, the food insecurity crisis that has been here for a long time. And there are new folks who can be advocates. We need to make sure we amplify those voices.
Yes. And I will just add to that on some things that I believe besides policy change that we can do is supporting higher minimal wages and closing the wage gap so that all workers are being fairly compensated for their labor. Increase access to fresh and nutritious foods, as we all stated. Like Shannon had said, expand safety net programs like SNAP and Medicaid, so families are experiencing hard times, they don't have to fall deeper into poverty. And making sure that everyone should have access, having everyone have access to an adequate place to live. So we need to protect and expand policies that will increase and supply the availability of affordable housing. Support ending the criminalization of poverty and help formerly incarcerated people rehabilitate and reenter society. And donate, volunteer, and support and speak out against all injustices. Like Shannon had said, we have seen more people due to COVID now, because what I personally feel is it has touched more than the BIPOC community. We are seeing people that have lost income that were six figures stand in our lines and embarrassed, and we don't want you to be embarrassed. We want you to be empathetic to what has been what has been going on before the COVID. We want you to be an advocate. We want you to understand and evaluate that as hard as you were working prior, it still happened. COVID touched everyone. And we can't just keep saying that the stereotypical things that, oh, or people of color don't work hard, or if they did this or this would be different. No, COVID has exposed all of that. No matter how hard we work, anything can happen. A grandparent can die, a parent can die, a child can die, and it can send us through loopholes that we may not be able to come back from. But I honestly believe that COVID has definitely exposed a lot. And for those persons that have just become part of receiving services from agencies, like, be an advocate and stand beside others that have been going through it and be an ally.
Thank you. So, what are some resources that individuals, people can take advantage of? Whether it's books, whether it's community-based organizations. I know that in the city of Albany, in the West Hill neighborhood, we have Albany Victory Gardens that they participate in urban farming, where they have community members that can have plots of land to farm. So. Do you all have any resources that you would recommend?
I mentioned it, alluded to it earlier, but I think it's important, especially for BIPOC organizations, or all organizations. But we've made a push specifically with United Way to specifically fund and target and reach out to BIPOC organizations to tangibly put dollars and resources from an economic standpoint, a capital standpoint, human resources at their disposal, but then also impact and reach out to organizations that are looking to do it at a ground level. And so, one of the resources I would strongly suggest is when organizations like that provide opportunities for funding, please apply. Because there are people like me who are sitting at the table and advocating and pushing and making sure that those organizations get the funding that they need to impact the desired communities that we're reaching out to. But if we don't get the applications, then I can't do what I need to do on my end. And from an equity standpoint, as an organization, that has been our number one priority. And so resources, tangible resources. How do I, organizations who have been funded from single moms who need diapers and strollers and food, Starletta raised their hand, but we funded organizations who specifically work with single moms, specifically single Black moms who come out of the hospital and need those resources. Here's tangible resources to support that programming. And it's not just United Way, there are many out there, but please, when the opportunity comes, please apply for the funding, and always look at it from an equity lens, from an equitable standpoint, and how you're going to impact this community, not just in 2021, but how can you make this sustainable so that if the funding dries up, the impact is not felt in the communities that you're trying to serve.
Yeah, I'll just add that, every community is different. And so the resources are always going to change. I think, United Way is a great example. Your local food bank, the work that they're doing, and food banks are changing every day, right? They're not just giving out food on a pantry line. They are doing pop-up pantries. They're doing local farming. They're giving out economic tools. Some of them have done grants. There's all these different opportunities. You just never know until you start working with the organization. And just to your point, Michael, you're right that we want folks to apply for those resources and reach out to those funders. At the American Heart Association, we definitely have provided grants, and it's something that we're very passionate behind. I have some of my strongest partnerships when people actually reach out and say, hey, we just want to get to know the AHA and what you're looking to do in the community. And if the funding doesn't necessarily go to them in that round or whatever it may be, usually we still work with them in some capacity because we find that their synergy, right, in the work we do. So the more that us community partners can work together and get to know each other, doesn't always have to result in the dollar, but sometimes it results in something even better, which is a long-term partnership that can result in dollars down the line, or helping you with a new system or data that we've already collected. There's a lot there. And so I definitely say knock on your neighbor's door, get to know each other. Doesn't have to be super competitive all the time. We're after the same goal. So make sure that we work together to get there.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so we're almost near time. So I will open the floor for you all to give closing statements. Anything you didn't mention before that you just want to touch on real quick, or just any encouragement for individuals who are watching this and want to get involved.
Let's go. For me, I would just say that YWCA of the Greater Capital Region not only does provides safe, affordable housing for women and women with children, but we also have food security programs. We have a community meal every Thursday at 6 o'clock. We have our food pantry that is open Monday through Friday from 12 to 4. We also do home deliveries through our food pantry. We also do economic empowerment, where we are looking for women within our building and in our community that will come to our Ready for Work program and get ready to get back to work. We are one of the largest woman-run organizations in the state, in the Capital Region. YWCA of the Greater Capital Region is the largest, but YWCAs across New York State do various different things, from ranging from daycare to immigration to policy changes or whatever, and get to know your local YWCA. We are dedicated to making change. We are dedicated to eliminating racism. We are here to empower women, and with that comes, empowering our male counterparts. But if you are in the Troy area, YWCA of the Greater Capital Region, and if you are abroad, find your local YWCA. We are in over 220, we have over 220 associations throughout the United States, but our local one is here. And I just want to thank each of you for this powerful hour, and as you've enlightened me in so many other ways. And I just am really grateful for the food pantries of the Greater Capital Region and SEFCU for putting this on.
I'm happy for that also. It's been a pleasure having the conversation. I think I'll just close with, food is a human right, and I think healthy food is even more of a human right. We know that it is going to aid in our ability to live long, healthy lives. It's going to fight and prevent chronic disease. And so please reach out should you want to work together. That's what we're here to do, right? So I'm at the American Heart Association, happy to be a resource and help connect the dots and be a part of the solution and help convene folks to continue this conversation. Every community is different, but certainly there has been great work that has been going on in the community that we can continue to turn key and continue to fight for. So I appreciate everybody tuning in today, and hopefully the conversation was impactful.
I'll jump in. Echoing what Shannon said, I'd love to be a resource with you. Chair of the community impact committees for both United Way of Greater Capital Region and the American Heart Association of Capital Region. And I think that the more individuals that we have that are connected, I'm sure when this call is over, I'm going to get Shannon on the phone so I can pick her brain and talk to Starletta and talk to Judy, because I think the more that we work in partnership and in unison, the better our communities will be. And it's not who gets the shine or whose name is in the lights. It's about the community and making sure that our communities that needs us the most gets what they need from an equitable standpoint. And so thank you for tuning in, and I'll turn it over to Judy.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for your time, and thank you to the panelists as well. This has been a great discussion. I do want to make a plug for the Center of Law and Justice on Green Street and in the South End, where I've done a lot of my work. So if you have any questions about any social support, advocating with a provider, getting transportation, medical transportation, finding a provider, changing your health insurance, legal resources, our door is open. All of us are happy to share our contact information with you in case you have any questions, any concerns, any thoughts. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, I think it's best if we take whatever strength, whatever privilege we individually have to amplify the voice of our community. Let's pass the microphone and let them talk.
Great. Again, we thank you all for joining us, and also thank the panelists. And also I want to thank the food pantries, the Gaithersburg region, for allowing me to be the moderator for this great event. I've learned a lot this afternoon, and I appreciate your expertise and you all willing to share it. This concludes our session. Thank you so much.